I want to start today with a question. What can roads tell us about settler colonialism? This question probably offers up some immediate thoughts about the role roads and transportation play in the destruction of the landscape and the facilitation of capital accumulation. These are important ways of seeing roads in the context of settler colonialism. However, when the question is reframed to ask, what can Rideau Street tell us about settler colonialism, the response is likely to be much more nuanced. Beginning with a brief overview of settler colonial and historical geographic theory, this paper considers the potential of hyperlocal histories for better understanding processes of settler colonialism. Specifically, I want to make a case here today for understanding the local culture of settler colonialism as an effective way to reveal both the common and distinctive processes of ongoing dispossession. Using the examples of roads, I ask, what is the local culture of territorial dispossession? How might we begin to identify and dislodge a culture of dispossession? Access to and control of land is the core component of settler colonialism. Roads facilitate this access. Colonialism, and thus dispossession, does not occur at a single point in time. It is ongoing. As Patrick Wolfe argues, settler colonialism should be seen as an ongoing social formation of complex relations, as a structure, not an event. Cole Harris's work in this area is instructive. Harris is a historical geographer, and he views dispossession as an event followed by a resettlement where settler colonials created a new human geography. While I align myself with Harris's geographic focus, I see dispossession not as an event, but as a structure. Roads and their development, through surveying, building, naming, and mapping, are part of the structure of settler colonialism. I contrast dispossession with dispossession as you see it written up here on the screen, to make the point that processes of dispossession and possession are active and intertwined structures. It's not just that dispossession may have been somewhat successful to date. It is also the idea of that the idea of possession has become rooted. I mean rooted in the sense that many generations of settlers have worked to attach themselves to and possess the land, building upon the work of previous generations to create a sense of belonging. The means of this possession are fluid, and possession is one form that rootedness takes. It grows each day, making restitution of indigenous lands increasingly difficult to envision. Dispossession, then, is not just surveys, maps, or property rights, though these things are certainly part of it. It is also a structure of shared feelings attached to material aspects of landscape. These feelings become representative of settler belonging within indigenous territories. Understanding settler colonialism and dispossession means finding ways to explain settlers to ourselves. As a settler born and raised on Vancouver Island, I've been influenced by and created my own particular connections to land. Take Alfred argues that settlers need to leave the, quote, old visions of conquest and privileges of empire behind, end quote, to focus on learning the history of the land and situating ourselves in the story of colonization. For me, a reflexive approach necessitates a focus on the local. Using examples from southern Vancouver Island, I argue that settler colonialism is as much about maintaining or performing possession as it is the removal or elimination of indigenous peoples. That is, settlers do not simply dispossess through temporally specific events. Rather, dispossession is entangled with a sense of settler belonging to land, as much as it involves surveys, maps, and a particular orientation to property rights. Settler colonialism seeks to uproot indigenous connection to land and entrench its own roots. Settler belonging to the land is intertwined with what Andrea Smith and Mark Rifkin call the logics of settler colonialism. Patrick Wolfe has called the attempt at settler rootedness the logic of elimination. These logics are diverse and offer a macro framework for understanding settler colonialism. The state, capitalism, genocide, heteropatriarchy, white supremacy, these are just a few of the logics of settler colonialism identified by settler colonial theorists. Understanding settler colonialism as operating through a variety of logics offers a useful starting point. However, the necessarily general nature of logics makes it difficult to see the flexibility of settler colonialism and limits the diverse possibilities for the restitution of Indigenous lands. The point here is that these logics or macro lenses must be accounted for in the context of locality. For example, settler colonial claims to property are created and upheld by a racist capitalist state, which deems private property rights to be protected by law. However, property is always part of a particular locality, part of a particular Indigenous territory. Roads and local histories about roads are one example of what this approach to local settler colonialism might look like. While settlers gain ongoing access to land through dubious legal and moral authority, a macro view threatens our understanding of the heterogeneous ways in which settler colonialism is carried out at a local level. Unless we understand the particularities of dispossession, it seems difficult to imagine anything else. It is at the local level where connections to land have been destroyed and built, and it is at the local level that land will be returned to Indigenous peoples. For the purposes of my dissertation, the focus of these and other questions are two particular regions on southern Vancouver Island: the Cowichan Valley, where I was born and raised, and the Sooke-Wanda-Fuka region, where I've spent quite a bit of time camping, hiking, and doing other recreational activities. It's important to note that the BC Treaty process is ongoing in these areas. I have not chosen them only for personal reasons. They are also the site of particular conflicts over land between the state, the forest industry, settler, and Indigenous peoples. In making a case for studying the local, I'm also arguing for an understanding of settler belonging to land. In this respect, the idea of an archive of feelings is instructive. In an archive of feelings, trauma, sexuality, and lesbian public cultures, Anne Chekovich explores cultural texts concerning trauma, particularly among queer communities. Chekovich notes that her book is, quote, organized as an archive of feelings, an exploration of cultural text as repositories of feelings and emotions, which are encoded not only in the content of the texts themselves, but in the practices that surround their production and reception. Mark Rifkin argues that settlement is a structure of feeling, and that affect, quote, registers how individuals participate in broader social processes. The task then for my dissertation has been to develop a reflexive and localized approach to ongoing dispossession. If settlers develop belonging to land, does, and if so, how does this belonging become entrenched locally? What might it look like to apply the concept of an archive of feeling to local histories that describe the areas with which I am most familiar as a settler? To begin, it's necessary to give context to the kind of local histories that I'm interested in here. The local histories that I'm looking at in my dissertation are what I would call hyper-local. They were written about small towns and communities and feature both general and detailed stories about obscure characters, events, and places. I'm sure a lot of you have probably read these. You know, there's a little vignette on the time the first car came to town. These kinds of local histories. They're frequently amateur in nature. They are not written by professional historians. They often contain no footnotes and no citations. They are memories and feelings, reminiscences of the early days of settlement and the evolution of settler communities. I'm not arguing for an understanding of these histories as quaint yarns of days gone by. These histories have played a role in justifying dispossession. Rather than view these hyperlocal histories as benevolent or absolving, I suggest that they be read as part of an archive of belonging, as windows into settler dispossession. Hyperlocal histories of both the Cowichan and Sooke regions are replete with stories about roads and road construction. Cole Harris describes roads as an element of the new human geography that followed dispossession. As I explained earlier, this portrays road building as an event rather than as a structure. Roads replaced the indigenous routes and modes of transportation that were essential in the earliest days of settler colonialism. A few examples from local histories provide a glimpse into settler dispossession and belonging to land. In the local history, And So They Came to Cowichan by Margaret W. Bishop, Bishop reminds readers that, quote, the Indian and his canoe were a great help to those first settlers. In fact, I would say they had to be regarded as the pioneers' taxicabs and ferries. Yes. Bishop and others offer nostalgic feelings of early settlement as a time when Indigenous peoples played a supportive role in colonization. Many of these routes were soon developed into roads, constructed out of a desire to connect isolated settler communities and transport goods to market. However, the construction of roads was not simply an event or an act of the settler state. In many instances, communities had to come together to petition the colony or province for and against roads. Rather than view roads as an inevitable outcome of the need to accumulate capital, we can also understand roads as evoking feelings and bringing together settlers. For example, settler colonials in both Cowichan and the Sauk regions united to petition the provincial government for roads during the latter half of the 19th century. Roads were also built according to local settler priorities and by local settlers. Bishop recalls, for years Papa helped with the gazetting and building of roads. He insisted on straight lines as far as possible in laying out a road. It was the policy of some to go around a large stump rather than take it out. This accounted for a lot of twists and turns in the old roads. Bishop's writings give us insight into the cultural and geographic legacy of roads. Looking at local histories to understand why, where, and by who certain roads were built offers up a pattern of dispossession based on access to land and relationships between settlers and with Indigenous peoples. Bishop does not only attach this significance to roads, she also attaches feelings. She writes, quote, not much remains of the old days, and not many who knew the beginnings, but I like to think of Somenos Road, which still runs through our valley as a monument to David and Margaret, her mother and father, who came when they were very young and stayed to see it grow into usefulness in this place which the Indian names Somenos, the sleepy or tranquil land. The dubious translation of Somenos, which is actually the name of a very large Hulkaminam village in the Cowichan Valley, and Bishop's memories reveal settler dispossession and feelings associated with roads in the area. Through a reading of hyperlocal histories, there begins to emerge an archive of belonging associated with roads. However, rather than see these examples as events, a look at contemporary examples of hyperlocal history reveals the structured nature of dispossession. In 2014, the Mill Bay Malahat Historical Society asked a local filmmaker to create a documentary on the history of the Malahat Highway. The short film, which was released earlier this year at a big gala event in Mill Bay on Vancouver Island, is a tribute to Major J.F. McFarlane, who was a settler in the town of Cobble Hill, who began a campaign to construct a road to replace the Goldstream Trail, which ran from Cowichan to Victoria. The production of this local historical film provides insight into the continued ways that settlers come together to celebrate roads. According to news coverage of the documentary, local farmers, local museums, and local businesses provided props and locations for the filming. And to top it all off, my high school acting teacher plays Major McFarlane in the film. Earlier this year, the film's director wrote, quote, many of us drive over the Malahat almost every day. For some people, it's the route to commute to work in Victoria. For others, it's a day to shop, go to a movie. It is a large mountain that got its name from an insect. It is also the home of the Malahat Nation, end quote. It remains unclear to me, and I tried to look into it, how the director made the connection between the name of the Malahat as an insect, because the name originates from the Malahat First Nation. So where this translation of it being an insect comes from is I'm not sure. But it's another questionable association in the vein of Bishop's translation of Somenos. To the Malahat First Nation, the name of the mountain is Yaz. The mountain is a sacred site, one that has been eroded and destroyed by settler colonialism. It is not just that roads generally dispossess. The Malahat Highway is a particular road that cuts through a particular site of significance to the Malahat Nation. Much as Somenos Road for Bishop recalls fond memories of her parents rather than a prominent Hulkaminam village, The Malahat Highway and its recent local celebration highlights the ongoing nature of dispossession. The creation of the Malahat Highway is not just an event, not simply a strategy for capital accumulation. Roads are associated with feelings that entrench belonging and a sense of settler rootedness to the land. If we return to hyperlocal histories, we are able to see the particularities of ongoing dispossession. We see that roads dispossess by building over, cutting through, and destroying Indigenous territories, and by uniting and expanding settler communities. Yet, as I've tried to show in this brief paper, a local analysis also reveals the settler experience of reifying and entrenching possession of and belonging to land. Rather than reinforce settler colonialism as an inevitable progression, can a localized look at settler colonialism allow us to envision an alternative to current settler-Indigenous relations? Roads and the access they provide have long been an important site of struggle against settler colonialism for Indigenous peoples. Think of all the blockades that you've heard about not only in the past, but in the very, very recent past. Roads are not simply routes from point A to B. If, as I had tried to demonstrate, hyperlocal histories give us insight into settler belonging, we can expose the shallowness of settler roots and identify strategies for the restitution of Indigenous lands. If local histories, or hyperlocal histories, are approached in this way, we may be able to check the further entrenchment of rootedness. When combined with new alternatives and ongoing resistance from Indigenous communities, making the locality of settler colonialism and a sense of belonging explicit rather than self-evident may help settlers envision alternatives and pull up roots when the time comes. Thank you.